So we have with us Rita Springer, the famous Rita Springer, the original Rita Springer, and she's been with us this week. Yeah, come on, babe. And she led worship with us Sunday night, and she's in our worship school. Well, welcome. What do you think of Bethel?
I love it. This is my first time here, so it's been great.
A little warm.
Well, yeah, but I love it because I was raised Southern California, so it's kind of a break from the humidity to the dry heat, which I love it. So.
And where do you live now?
In Charlotte, North Carolina.
Your home church is the Fire Church.
Fire Church, yeah.
With
Michael
Brown.
Bob Gladstone and Scott Volk, yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
How long have you been going there?
4 years, about 4 years, yeah. I've been in North Carolina for about just over 4 years, so I went there for that church. So.
Oh, you did?
I moved there to be a part of that
I don't
community.
think I even knew that.
Yeah.
And what's that like?
It's great. It's great. I mean, I've been a little bit. I've been home a little bit more, so that's great because I think when you travel so much, it's hard to connect and find community. And I love those guys, and I've communicated with them, but it's a lot harder to find community with everybody in the church. So I'm kind of feeling that now after 4 years, which is good.
Yeah, you've been home quite a bit more lately, but how often do you travel? What's your normal travel schedule?
Well, the normal really is anywhere up to 41 weekends a year, which is a lot. You know,
goodness.
It's crazy. This year hasn't been as much, which there's good parts about that and bad parts about that. But for the most part, it's great because I have a 3.5-year-old now. So.
That you adopted.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's amazing. His name's Justice.
Mm-hmm. Justice Zane, that's right. He's awesome.
That's a prophetic declaration over his life.
Yeah, it is. I actually found out that somebody from his origin is Zimbabwe.
Wow.
He was born in the States. Both birth parents were from had school visas from Harare in Zimbabwe, and so a really popular name there is Justice, and I never knew that. So.
And you got to name him.
And I named him Justice. So
That's
I
awesome.
didn't know it was a popular African name as well.
So what's the greatest challenge of being a Christian singer, musician, songwriter? What's the greatest challenge?
I think to keep the steadfast place, I think, of your heart always kind of not right with the Lord, because I think that's a little bit more easy with me because I love the Lord and that's just an effortless thing. But I'm in different denominations every weekend. And so you see a lot of stuff, you know, what some churches love and some churches don't, and some churches are okay with, some churches aren't. And so I think just to keep the main focus of the Lord where you are at all times. So it really doesn't matter where you go into, the Catholic Church, the Episcopal Church, or whoever calls you in. They're curious about something anyway. And just to keep that steadfast kind of position with the Lord always in the forefront for me.
What do you think the greatest joy of your life is? I mean, outside of the Lord himself, obviously, and your son, which will just draw that out of you. Like, what do you love?
Maybe 6 months ago, I wouldn't even have known how to answer that.
Okay.
But mentoring.
You love to mentor.
I never knew how powerful mentoring would be until I did hands-on with it. I mean, I always say, gosh, my greatest gift probably isn't songwriting as much as it's encouragement. I love to encourage people. And I guess they say encouragement is really just to throw courage on someone. But when I started mentoring this year on a one-on-one basis in a class, it just rocked my world.
Now, you know, we hear the words mentoring, coaching, discipleship.
Yeah.
From your perspective, is there any difference in those three? And what is exactly like, okay, so you're mentoring me, what exactly are you doing?
Well, I think what my perspective of it is, what I'd love to do is, because there's mentoring and then there's this equipping thing.
Okay.
And I think for me it's kind of rolled into the same package. But to equip somebody, that's a huge kind of deal in and of itself. So I think it's mentoring people, or mentoring, actually what I do is mentoring young worship artists, women worship artists.
Just for females only?
Yeah, right now that's what the Lord has kind of put me into, because I do this little school, and just having this one-on-one encounter where you really give away what He's taught you.
Okay.
And in that sense, equipping them with some of the same standards that He gave you to follow out the plan of what he has kind of told me worship really looks like.
Okay, so let me just see if I understand exactly
Sure,
what you're
yeah.
saying. So you're only mentoring worship leaders.
Well, that's kind of the
Primarily.
yeah. That's the to get them in. But then when they get there, you realize some of them aren't really leaders. They like to sing or artistic,
Okay.
creative, artistic people. Let's just put it that way.
Do creative artistic people, do they share common strengths and weaknesses from your perspective? Or
Some of
are
them
they
do.
just like anyone else?
Yeah, I think that the common denominator in us all is we've all been fractured. And because we've all been fractured, there's pain that's a result of that.
Wow.
And for me, there's a melody inside the pain. And the melody inside the pain is what is beautiful to the Lord. And that's, I think, the truth of worship.
And
And I'm not talking corporate worship. I'm just talking worship of the soul, worship of the heart.
so you're saying that that pain, or maybe our culture might call it brokenness, that
Yeah.
out of that
Yeah, oh, yeah.
brokenness comes something beautiful to God.
Yeah, yeah. You know the whole Mark 14 approach. You know the woman that comes before Jesus with this bottle of perfume, and when she breaks it, this fragrance is released.
Okay.
And so it's that whole idea of when you come with your brokenness, regardless of if it comes out of your sin or your shame or whatever it is, He can take that and when you put a spin on it with that whole creative sense, or you're bringing in people with some kind of a creative background, whether it be dancers or musicians or singers or songwriters or prophetic voices that are just intercessors, whatever it is. I think that's the common denominator. Everybody has that stuff. Everybody
Totally.
has brokenness.
Totally.
And when we realize that in the midst of our brokenness is a sound that He loves to listen to, because when it's brought to Him, it becomes our freedom.
And it's not like the sound like owie, 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 owie,
No,
owie.
yeah,
It's
no.
a different song than that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It's just it's an inner melody. Like for me, I don't think that if I would have, I know for a fact if I wouldn't have had the painful experiences in my life, none of my songs would have ever come to being. They would have never been formed, or I would have never tried to articulate them verbally.
Some of your songs are written specifically about that, aren't they?
Oh yeah, very much. A lot of them are.
I mean, I was noticing that Sunday night, I think we sang a couple of songs that began almost like the psalmist, where he's kind
Yeah.
of like crying out, like, God, where are you? And
Right.
are you really here? Do you really care about me? And then he ends with, God's my refuge, my
Right, right,
Savior.
right,
I noticed
right.
that pattern is in some of your songs, like
Oh yeah.
begins with some point of pain and ends with some point of victory.
Yeah, well, that's all of Scripture. Yeah, that's everybody's. It seems like it's everybody's dialogue, which is great because really, when as a worship leader or someone that's actually in the worship field or the musical worship field, because I think we're all called to be worshipers. When you look at that, and when you look at a lot of even David's stuff, David has that whole why, yet I will.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, gosh, that's just the truth of worship, is that He'll listen to the complaint, the Lord will listen to the complaint, but the end result is, I'm going to give you everything in the sanctuary. I'm going to tell you what I think of you, so it's...
Do you think that people ever come to a complete place of wholeness in their life?
I don't know, because what I call it is, I call this thing that I'm on, this road that I'm on, this progression with God.
Uh-huh.
That every day, if I want more of Him, I can house more of Him. I get to know more of Him. I can find out a little bit more about what He loves and what He doesn't love, and find a little bit more about how I can serve Him in a different way, if I really want to go after that.
Yeah.
He said there was more of Him, that it would surpass my knowledge, that I would ever be even able to contain the amount of love or the kind of love that He offers. So I guess to me that just means there's more of it to be had if I want it.
Yeah,
So-
Ephesians 3, of course, talks about that we would know the love of God that surpasses knowledge,
Right.
which is an interesting, almost paradoxical contradiction. Like, how do I know what surpasses knowledge?
Right.
So it's like we would know by experience what we couldn't know by our intellect.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Paul talks about that He would do exceedingly abundantly more than we ask or think. So if we can ask it or think it, He wants to do more than that.
Yeah.
That's almost like you can't exaggerate how much God wants to do for you,
Right.
because if you ask it or think it or thunk it, then He wants to do more than that.
Yeah.
That's pretty
So,
amazing.
Yeah, so if you just keep walking it out, I think there's more to be had. I think it's for everybody, but the reality of it is a lot of people's pain keeps them from progression.
Mm-hmm.
And that whole wrestle with how the enemy comes in to try to keep us down so that we can't, because I think that there's power there's obviously power in the freedom of drawing yourself away from your darkness and letting that very thing that tried to keep you down be the thing that brings him praise and glory. So
Yeah, I mean, the gospel does mean good news.
yeah.
So, yeah, it's like I was thinking about Abraham, how God told him to leave the Chaldeans, and he said, leave your family. But of course, Abraham didn't do that; brought Dad with him. And then the Bible says on the way that his brother, Abraham's brother, named Haran, dies. And then when they came to a city named Haran, it said that his father refused to leave there. And I think that's such a great metaphor for, and finally, the story goes on to say that they had to wait for Abraham's father to die off so that they can move on.
Right.
And I think that what you're saying is so true and real. It's like everybody has pain in their life. You're not going to get out of that. Jesus said, in the world you're going to have tribulation.
Right.
But some people get stuck in their pain,
Right.
where they get stuck in their Haran, their
Yeah.
place,
Yeah.
their place where their promise died, and they can't go on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what we want to make sure that doesn't happen. So that's probably part of your mentoring, right? Like,
Yeah.
how do you get past your pain? How do you get
Yeah.
over yourself, kind of thing?
Yeah, I think for me that what I do now in ministry for the Lord came out of those very difficult places, and that I just happen to put a pen in my hand and write them out in a lyrical content. Some people journal it, some people preach it, I just happen to sing it.
But you're a musical genius.
Well, no, I would know. I don't class myself as oh my gosh, I hang out with musical geniuses.
No,
but,
you're brilliant.
I think I am
She's
more.
brilliant. She likes to
No,
argue
I
with
really
me.
am not.
But she's a brilliant songwriter.
And I'm
for
not
sure.
trying to be all humble either. I know technically my limitations, but I love telling God what I think or telling God how I feel.
That's
in
amazing.
word form or in poetry form, and I think that's what I probably have more of a strong lyrical
Genius.
gifting than I do musical genius.
You're an
Anyway.
amazing songwriter.
Whatever.
You're an amazing worship leader.
Oh, I appreciate that. That's sweet.
But I just want you to humble yourself and agree with me.
I so agree.
Because
with you.
I'm right.
Amazing.
Here I am. I'm right.
Oh my
There.
gosh, I'm
See, there you go.
awesome.
Okay,
You're
there.
so awesome.
See, there I am, right again. What is your greatest victory in ministry? Your greatest accomplishment or greatest victory, or is it the best your best-selling song that you've ever written, or is there what, like when you think of, or let me make it a little bit easier. What's one of your greatest victories? One of your greatest accomplishments from your perspective?
Within what I do.
Yeah, in the ministry. I know it'd probably be Justice would be.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's
son
great. I think, you're kind of in this circle. I'm sure you obviously know what I'm talking about when you meet all these different people, and when I connect with people that do the things that I do, and you listen to their stories and stuff, and there are some people that I love dearly that have lost a little bit of, or sometimes a lot of bit of their pursuit, their passion in the pursuit because of what happens in ministry. And I think that the thing that I've, I don't even want to say the word achieved, but the thing that I've realized is the most important that I've grabbed a hold of and I haven't let go of, is that in 10 years of constant traveling, if you were to call the pastor in California that I visited that church 10 years ago and called the pastor that I was at last weekend, they'd both have the same thing to say.
And what would that be?
That I love the Lord, and I just want to see Him found. And that, I think that thing that, because the Lord would really shake me in the early days. He'd just be like, make sure that you never say anything, write anything, sing anything, or do anything that you've not already experienced, or you're not willing to experience the
Wow.
moment you leave the platform.
Wow.
And when I asked the Lord, even, he actually told me that in Africa many years ago, and I was like, what is this? What's the importance of all this? And he said, because there are so many that go out in my name and have never even asked me who I am. Ask me who I am, so that every time you go out, it will be real. And I think that, that whole New Testament, the seed thrown on thorny ground, or the seed thrown on soil that really caught it, and that if we go out really with the belief system that he is who we're telling everybody
Totally.
that he is,
Yeah.
and we walk it out, we believe it, and that if it's something we haven't really experienced, but the Lord's pressing on us to talk about it, then we have to be willing to walk it out the minute I mean, you know that. I mean, how many times have you said something from a platform and then had to go home and actually deal with the very same thing?
Totally.
I mean, I think it's just part of all the beauty of how the Lord's like, it's got to be real, it's got to be spirit and truth, it's got to be that whole thing. And so I think for me, if I were to call it a victory, the importance of that has been so profound in my life that I have never let go of that promise to the Lord, that I would let it be real every time. Even if I was in a church in a weekend and realized, I don't think I'm supposed to be here, which hasn't happened often, the Lord has still used it.
So what I think a few things you're saying there is like you don't just have a message, like you want to be the message.
Yeah, I think we're supposed to live it and walk it. I mean, he said he wanted to make his home in us, that we would shine him.
Yeah.
So when I come to lead worship or do it, what they now are calling nights of experience or whatever, we call them all these different things, which I think is great, or a concert with Rita Springer, which, it's like whatever. I want to be the same in that I was to the small little women's retreat. I give away the same thing in that little night of worship, or that big night of worship with thousands of people that I did the weekend prior with the 25 ladies up on a little mountain retreat. And they may have gotten more one-on-one time, but the illumination of what I'm there to offer was the same deal. I remember the Lord told me once, I got this really amazing sister who has homeschooled her 5 kids for 18 years. And the Lord really said to me, don't think that what you do to me in crowds of thousands, she doesn't do to me with those 5 kids in a table every morning. That's her worship, that's your worship. I don't keep it on a Richter scale, so keep it in proportion and keep it in perspective that what you do is no more important to me than what she does at a table with all those babies. So I've always kind of kept that in the back of my mind when I'm doing stuff, that it's important to him, but so what worship period is important to him, however you do it.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that we have done, that we've made a mistake as a church, and I don't mean Bethel, but globally, is that we reduced worship down to something you do when the music starts.
Yeah.
And we create a schizophrenic lifestyle, because we say we're having a worship service as if when we leave the service, we're no longer worshiping.
Right.
And instead of Romans 12, where I've offered my life as a living sacrifice,
Right.
I make worship something I do.
Yeah.
Instead of an expression of who I am.
Right. Well, I was telling the students today if I'm speaking to potential or already in the ministry worship leaders, really I believe that a worship leader's job is to make the congregation jealous to find him. And if they are watching the worship leader go after God, they need to provoke a jealousy among the people.
That's awesome.
That make if I make you jealous for where I'm at with God, then I've done my job.
Yeah.
Because it makes you run a little bit faster or want a little bit more of that. And I can't tell you how many times people have come up to me saying, "Man, I wish I had a relationship like you have with God." It's like, of course you can. Absolutely, you can have exactly the same thing.
Yep.
You have to desire to go there. So.
He gives the Holy Spirit without measure, which means the only measurement is on our side.
Yeah.
So if you have this much of God, I can have that much of God, because
Yeah.
I'm the one who decides how big of a bowl I bring,
Right.
how big of a bucket
Right.
I bring to the throne.
That's right. So.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Let's talk just a little bit more about the mentoring, because we didn't
Sure,
quite finish that up. So what exactly do you do with them? Like, are you one-on-one mentoring them, or?
Yeah. What I'm doing is, like in probably late December, January, I heard the Lord say, dive. dive. And I was like, dive. And I knew there was that imagery there of just diving off like the highest platform and just not knowing how you were going to land or how it was going to hurt if you did it. But just that free fall, that kind of diving thing for women to experience. And I take women in, and I've had some emails like, don't you take guys? And it's not about a male or female thing. It's that in the road, in 10 years of being on the road full time, they're just scattered all over the church. And women just don't know how to find a lot of encouragement. And they're just kind of beaten down. And they're really not beaten down by men, they're beaten down by themselves. And so,
or both.
Yeah, or both. But
I agree with
what
you.
would normally be what I would assume isn't always the case. And so I felt like the Lord just said it as an acronym kind of thing. So it kind of stands for Deep, Innovative, Vertical Expression.
Oh my goodness!
It's just, and I felt like He said to take 12, kind of based on that whole idea of Jesus saying all these things to the people, but then taking the 12 aside and telling them everything.
Yeah.
And so I kind of wanted that idea, which when we did the first school in March, I was like, no wonder He only put 12 together, because it really created this whole intimate unity. I mean, it was really the most phenomenal thing I've ever done in ministry, was just to sit with those 12 girls and just throw on them everything that He's ever taught me or told me, listen to their stories, encourage them with their giftings. And you got some that are really, really gifted, and some that are like, honey, you should just maybe go home and wash the dishes. Because they, they're not really
singers or musicians.
But I'm not looking for the great talents of the world. I'm looking for worshipers with an artistic bend. And so you just kind of get, and a lot of these women are just these worship leaders of these small churches, and some of them in the South, and that just need encouragement, and want to go to a deeper level, but really don't know how.
So you just bring them in for a week?
Bring them in for a week and put them up in a hotel, and for basically 12 hours a day, we just do intensive training. And the first 3 days is intense. It's more personal intense. In fact, I'm like, put all your instruments off to the side. We're not going to look at them. Outside of just worshiping before meetings, we're not even going to look or talk about them or your giftings for the next 2 days. And I take them into the House of Prayer in Concord, North Carolina, that opened there about 7 months ago, and I make them learn prophetic exercises, and they have to prophesy over each other, and we do kind of all that kind of stuff, and then at the end of the week, do song presentations, and where we can really technically kind of say, you know what, I think this fits there and this fits there, and you should try this, and vocal training and things like that. But at that point, it's great because they're like these little free birds that have gotten kind of all their crud out of the way, or are using some of those dark things to push them into the light in the end of the week. So it's been really great. It's been great.
For it to be really scriptural, you'll have to have at least one Judas for every
I know.
for every 11 Peters, I guess, right?
So it's been great. It's been great. We've actually only done 2, and our third one is in August.
Wow.
So, but I always think I got 24 girls out there who I keep emailing me, telling me how much the Lord's changed them and done stuff, and I'm like, that is the greatest thing I think I've ever done, is to see them, and then just go see them walking now and talking now and doing all these things. We're like, they were little babies when they came to me, and now they're, so it's great.
How does the Christian music industry, from your perspective, differ from the secular music industry?
Oh, that's a can of worms.
Some of the answers are obvious. I'm not talking about lyrically or whatever. I'm talking about specifically the industry. Is there a difference, or is there not a difference
between
the secular music industry and the Christian music industry?
Well, really, on paper and in boardrooms, there's no difference.
There's no difference, okay.
Because most all of the mainstream Christian labels are owned by the secular labels.
They are? Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's all run by secular, unspiritual people, for the most part. This is just in the 15 years that I've been doing this. And I've kind of never been understood in it, but I can remember being with one, I'm not going to name any names, but being with a major Christian record label, and one of the A&R guys was talking to me about how frustrating it had been for him, because he was really trying to look for the things that the Lord was looking for. But the label itself was still looking for the youth, the publishing, and the talent that they could push and mold into what they wanted to make. It had really nothing to do with where the Lord was. In fact, when I met with that particular label, they were really curious about that group in the UK called Delirious, and they had all flown over there to see, because there was this kind of phenomenal thing happening in worship. And one of his comments to me I've never forgotten, and he said to just kind of define for you a little bit about what it's like in a boardroom, in a board meeting, debating over what is the up-and-coming thing. He said and this was quite a number of years ago that he was telling me this, but he said they had just had Keith Green stuff in the middle of the table, and the discussion that morning, what they had to get to the bottom of what was it about Keith Green's music that sold so many albums. And the obvious, could it have been the Lord, was never one of the options that was brought up. There had to be some kind of a
formula
for that many sales of that. It couldn't just be the people were hungry for the Lord. That would have been too easy. And how do you formulate that? How do you get people to be hungry for? So I've had a lot of, it's been a long road for me with the whole industry. I actually am really good friends with an up-and-coming guy out of Charlotte who is being managed by a very well-known secular guy, and he's about ready to sign the most lucrative secular deal as a Christian man that has ever been signed in the history of signing. And no secular artist has ever been able to get away with what the Lord told him he could get away with, and he did. And it wasn't based on just a time or a day. It was based on the sound of his music.
Wow.
They heard something in the sound of his music that they didn't care. They just wanted it. They wanted it out there.
What do you think about some of these Christians that are crossing over into both worlds?
I think it's great. I think it's great when they are doing it because they're called by God to do it. They're doing it and they have people around them that believe in them, love them, pray. They have high accountability, all those things. Mute Mouth has done it. Lifehouse has done it. Those guys are great, great guys. I love Mute Mouth to death, and they're just doing phenomenal stuff. But kind of what tends to happen is because most of the Christian world doesn't understand that, because it's, it's almost like, oh no, they're leaving us for the other pack. It's not about that. I mean, Jesus was very sincere when he talked about going into, the world to teach him. And he didn't really give us complete specifics by you can't do this and you can't do this. And it's just obvious, compromising is usually what will happen.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of that happens because there's no intercession.
Yeah.
There's no support. There's no leadership that's backing these guys up. There's no rallying and being in their balconies screaming out, you can do it, you can do it, we're praying for you, we believe in you. Go find the youth and bring them in. I mean, it's that, and I just am one of those, they call me a mom now. I mean, they call me a mother now of that. And if I've got to find these young artists as sons and daughters and mother them in that and send them off and watch them go into the world and bring back thousands and thousands of young people that the Christian artists could never do, in their Christian world.
Have you ever crossed over? Have you ever been?
I have, a little bit,
over?
yeah. I did I worked for a secular, very wealthy secular woman, and she financed motion pictures. And so I wrote a song for a major motion picture that had nothing to do with worship, had nothing to do with, but I wrote it out of my worshiper's heart.
That's good.
And it was a very well-loved song in the circle that it went. It never went anywhere crazy or great. It's a great song, but it was a great experience for me. I was actually telling the students about it because it's such a great story of going into the world. And when I wrote the song, I was having to sign all these contracts by Beverly Hills lawyers. They thought it was going to be the next Celine Dion Titanic song, and there was all this commotion around the song, and really the end result was that one of the actresses from the motion picture I was able to witness to, and I would never have been able to do it if I had never been at the right place at the right time and that song had never been formulated for one soul.
Wow.
And so that just speaks volumes to me on how if you give it to the Lord and He wants to do it, He can do whatever He wants to do.
Why do you think that song didn't become a big hit?
You know, I think I was telling the students again today that, like, I have songs in folders that have never met with their season yet.
Yeah.
And we can do things that are preparation for a season to come, especially artistically.
Yeah. Yeah.
But until that season comes upon us, or until that season grabs a hold of that sound, it's just there until the Lord has it. I mean, there are songs that are completed that have never been on an album yet because they haven't met with the right season for them to do
Yeah.
that. Effortless, the album that I did a number of years ago with David Roos producing, we threw a song in there called About God. That song at that point was about 7 years old. And I spent one night, took me an hour, and I wrote 10 songs that had nothing to do with corporate worship, but it had everything to do with like a folk rock thing that was happening at the time, you know, in the late 90s, early 2000s. And those songs just, I didn't know what to do with them. I didn't know why I was writing them. But I have more email about that song being on that album and how that was just, for some people, just this refreshing, you know, approach to something that wasn't congregational, but something that made a statement that spoke to the soul. And, you know, it lied around for a long time, and then it finally got to breathe. So I do think that there's just times and seasons for things. And I do think that God can motivate you to speak to a group of people, and all of that research that you did met with one soul because God was screaming the name of that one soul for 10 years. And it wasn't until you were obedient to come across that one scripture that you taught of, and you decided, oh, I'm supposed to do it at so-and-so's church. And it was where that person happened to be invited to by a friend, and bam, there it was. I mean, that's just the beauty of God.
Yeah.
So I keep my hands open and just say, if I'm writing this song and it's only for a small group of people, or one person, or some person over in Kathmandu that will hear it because of something, because of something, because of something, because of some, you know, ripped off download, go for it.
You know, Jesus talked about the fact that the Pharisees, he said, John sang the dirge and you didn't mourn.
Right.
And he said, I sang the wedding song and you didn't rejoice. And so there is that song season like you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a season for a different
Well,
song.
in Ecclesiastics, I mean, Solomon says it great. I mean, everything, there's a season and a time. If you're mourning and it's not your season to mourn, it's going to be a tough mourning season for you.
Yeah.
And, you know, I love it because we hang on some of these verses, but we forget to read the following thing. You know, it says, you know, to everything, you know, there's a season, and it's the burden of man that these seasons are in. They're allotted. But it's because he wants to strengthen us in these seasons. And so I just think, you know, I just hold my hands open all the time and just be like, you know what you're doing, I don't. If I'm just obedient, you'll just show me and lead me down where you want me to go. So.
Of course, all of us older people want to sing it, turn, turn, turn.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How do you write a song? Like, does it come to you in the night? Do you spend hours on it? Is it, you just said, I wrote 10 songs in an hour. And
It's always been really easy for me. About 4 years ago, I entered into a really rough season where the Lord made me pine away for it. And I realized that it wasn't about the craft of the art. It was a very tough season that some seasons you don't wrestle with God as much. Other seasons you do until he calls out your real name.
Yeah.
And I just had that season where I realized it wasn't so easy to write this thing anymore. And I became, I sometimes get tired of singing the same thing. You know, you can tell God all your pain and sorrow, but there came a time where I was like, I need to start declaring some stuff here. I need to start, you know, being celebratory. I need to start getting some praise on me. I need to start, because I am a great, I'm a great articulator of a tough season songwriter. And that's why people, I think, love what I do. I mean, I had one of those record label guys said, well, I've gone to one of your concerts before, and your demographic lays on the floor and cries through the whole, you know, through the whole concert. And they were trying to figure out how to get my demographic back to the table to buy the CDs because they were so torn. during the, and I'm like, I like that demographic. I've always loved that demographic because people were getting somewhere with the Lord and getting some things out of their lives in the midst of that. But there comes a season where I'm like, I want to shout. I want to, so those songs were a little bit harder to find because I found myself still struggling and wanting to shout. And so I had to dig a little deeper, research a little bit more, and trust God to articulate it. I think, this has been my greatest songwriting season I've ever been in right now. The last year I've been writing with another writer who's just kind of doing the music, and Paulette will just sit down and play, and stuff will just come streamlining into me.
Wow.
And that's never happened before. And so I feel like I'm in the time of my life with songwriting now because I'm writing some of the freshest stuff I've ever written and articulating things I've never been able to articulate. And I think it has to do with the joining up of the partnering up of that. I've never found anybody who could play to my sound, play to my soul. I've always played to my own soul. So that's been a really kind of a cool season for me to be in a place where I'm like, sit down, I've got some musterings going on up here, and I just want you to put a chord to it. That's what we'll do. So that's been great.
She's become, like Paulette's become like a catalyst to your music.
She has. But the great thing about Wooten is that she's written so many of Susie Uri's songs, or Susie Wells, it used to be Susie Wells songs. And, Paulette's this brilliant writer who, she's like ADD. Her mind's going all the time, and she's always creating. She's, she was even telling me, a couple of months ago, I think if on this particular song, when you hit this particular chord, we should click it into this and this computer and this, and then on the screen flashes this whole scenery and blah, blah, blah. I mean, she has this thing that runs through her head the whole time, and I've never been around anybody that's like that. And I'm like, okay, Paulette, do whatever you want to do. But it's great because there's a lot of similarities between what the Lord is calling her into and what the Lord has been speaking to me. And so when those two things get in a room and we start mulling over what God's doing, or she'll come back from England with a few chord progressions, and I'm like, hey, you came back from me with a few chord progressions. I just had this whole idea run through my head for this song. Let's put those two together and see what the Lord does. So that's been fun.
What is your best-selling song ever?
It's kind of a cross between a song called You Are Still Holy, which Vineyard recorded quite a number of years ago, and Worth It All. Called Worth It All, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. What's your greatest experience you've ever had in God? You ever seen an angel? You ever had God visit you?
I felt them. I felt them, especially in the 90s when a lot of that stuff was going on. But I think that I just can't give away that one-on-one closet time where just sitting with the Lord with my piano, and that just thing hovers over you and just comes like a cloak around you, and you just, you could probably do anything, and God would think it was so cool.
That's awesome.
So I love those moments. I mean, I've had some really great supernatural moments, but I think those one-on-one things, when Justice was a newborn and I'd open the door at 2 o'clock in the morning to, go give him a bottle, and I would feel the Lord. Like I would ask the Lord to please move out of the way so that I could get to my kid, kind of thing, where the Lord was just so hovering over him that it brought such this place and this peace in my house that made me so aware of.
You adopted Justice, but you're not married, right?
No, not yet. Not yet.
By the way, she needs a husband, so we're working on that. But so why did you adopt Justice? And
I was standing in Romania, in Timișoara, Romania, in May of 2004. I was in a very primitive hospital, and I was holding about a 6-day-old baby that they were just waiting for him to die so that he would empty a bed for them. There was no name on the incubator, and the Lord just leaned down and he whispered in my ear, and he said, I father the fatherless. It's about time you start mothering the motherless. And in January of 2004, when I was praying about the rolling over of the new year and what I was to expect that year, the Lord said, expect this. I'm going to show you the color of worship this year. And I thought it would be in some revelation of Scripture. And I had no idea that when his little black face would come out of his birth mother's womb, with the origin of Africa all over him. And the Lord said, there it is, there's the color of worship.
Wow.
So really it was an act of obedience. It was a very terrifying act of obedience to do as a single person. I had my paradigm, I had everything all set up. I had told the Lord I would do anything for him, but please give me the Suburban, the white picket fence, and let me already have kids and a husband and all those things that would just set you up nicely before you obeyed the Lord.
Totally.
And the Lord said, I'm not waiting for your life to get convenient. I say you're convenient when I say you're convenient.
Wow.
And I just kind of threw up my hands and I said, okay, if this is my Isaac, I might have to walk it up the mountain and maybe you won't have me pull out the knife, but I'll do this for you. And every fleece that I laid out was answered. And I went to an adoption agency in Florida, and I told the Lord I wanted an African baby, and never thinking he'd ever bring Africa to me. And this young 23-year-old woman who was on a school visa from Zimbabwe had met a man, and he had abandoned her and went back. And she walked into the adoption agency 5 weeks before justice was due.
Wow.
No money, no way to survive. The U.S. was going to deport her if she didn't start using her visa for school. She had a 3-year-old from a previous relationship that she had come out here on, and last result, she just couldn't do it. Her family begged that she would send the baby back to Zimbabwe, but if anybody knows anything about what's happening there, it's horrific. And she didn't want that for the baby, and so she was chosen. They put out 3 profiles in front of her. And she opened my profile and she said, "Give that woman my baby."
Wow.
And so I met her and was there when he was born. Took him home from the hospital, and it's been a wild ride ever since.
Has her birth mother ever seen him?
She
his birth mother.
She was stayed 24 hours. I was with her the whole time, and I actually have it on film, her saying goodbye to him in the hospital, which is probably the most amazing, beautiful thing I've ever witnessed in my entire life. I don't think I realized what she was doing while I was filming it, but you could just tell in the video that she was memorizing every inch of that little baby's body to remember him in her mind. And I keep in touch with her quite a bit and send her pictures.
That's
and
awesome.
She's on she'll go on the website to see him and stuff. And Justice is a really great little drummer. And I talked to her just after Christmas and told her all this, and she watched him on YouTube doing some stuff, and it really broke her heart in a good way. But I asked her if anybody in her family had played, and she said that her brother, I think she told me, was a very accomplished drummer in Africa. And so it's been a wild journey. It's a great thing. I mean, he's responsible for 2 moms as far as I'm concerned. And he'll know 2 moms for the rest of his life.
Wow.
I just think that's the key to keeping that adoption thing, that identity thing off a child.
And it's not easy, raising it.
Not by yourself.
By yourself, raising
But
a
you know,
child
my
by yourself.
father died when I was 9, and the one core thing that the Lord told me was, I did a great job with you. I can father him. So I had that to go on. And I said, okay, we'll do this.
But it's work.
So it was, it'd be worth it. I mean, the way the Lord actually told me in the beginning, he said, let's go raise a warrior. Like it was going to be this great, exciting journey. And I know that it is for the Lord, but sometimes it's hard, especially traveling and all that stuff. But he's an amazing kid.
It's amazing how, I don't think it's just about adoption, but it's about the Christian life in general. It's like we have these great ideas that you preach from the pulpit.
Oh,
and
yeah.
they're just, they look great on a whiteboard and they're awesome to articulate, but they're much more difficult to live out.
Right.
You know what I'm getting at, of course. If you're older than 30, you pretty much know what I'm talking about. So you get this, whether it's adoption or we're going to have a coffee house,
Right,
it's like,
right.
and it's going to be this romantic, like there's this, people are going to get saved there, and then we forget about, people have to be served the coffee, and someone has to make it, someone has to clean up after people, and it's just it's just anything you do, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing about preaching. It's like, I want to be a preacher, and they think that all we do is like get to preach, we come for church on Sunday and we preach, and then we spend all week preparing for the message or something.
Right.
Like, it's like,
Right. Right. Yeah, it's a little bit harder when you're walking
It's just
it
a
out.
little bit harder than
Yeah,
that.
but it's actually the whole idea of adoption, I had known this prior to that, but one of the really specific, precious things about adoption is in the legal system, you could disown your biological children.
Mm-hmm.
And the judge will actually cut every right you have out, and by law, it'll no longer appear that you have any right to them. But if you adopt, the judge would never do it. In fact, when you go before a judge, he makes you swear that you realize that no matter what happens, you can't give that baby away.
In
And
Jewish
it's-
culture, you probably know this, but the adopted child got double inheritance.
Right. So it's actually really this cool thing that I the Lord just said, go do what I did for you. And that's really what I'm walking out. He told me I was adopted, and he told me he adopted me as a daughter. And so I just really feel like I'm kind of walking out what he did for me in this reality with justice. And it really is quite a prophetic journey, really quite a prophetic journey with that little boy, because he is an amazing kid. So.
Last question
Yeah.
for you. If you had one thing to say to worship leaders and Christians alike, what would it be?
Well, really, it's just that he has to be the focus at all times. We can cry out for so many wonderful things to emerge in our churches or in our lives, or for our CDs to sell, or for this to happen, or for God to move us here, or God to do this. And all those things are amazing and wonderful gifts. But if we lose sight of him in the process, we've lost everything. And if he remains your focus, I think that whole keeping your face as flint before the Lord,
Yeah.
that the goal isn't about gaining all those other things. It's really about gaining more of him in the process. And I just think that's the most important thing, that the eye has to be in the center. And if we keep our eyes in the center, then it really doesn't matter how many storms come. We're all going to be okay.
So it's like keeping the main thing. The main thing is to keep the main thing, or Jesus said this way, what does it profit if you gain the world and lose your soul?
I know.
And
he is not something you'd want to lose.
of course, as a Christian, you never get discouraged.
Oh gosh, yeah,
No,
never.
because we're Christians.
Right.
So
Perfect.
Yeah, I love it. I love how Matthew 6 finishes, how Jesus finishes Matthew 6. He says, don't worry about tomorrow, which, if he would have put a period there, it would have been just an awesome verse.
Right.
He says, for each day has enough trouble of its own.
Right.
Like, that's not the good part of the verse.
Right.
But it's encouraging that God gives us the grace and ability to rise above
Oh yeah.
the tribulations of life, find joy in it. And
Yep.
well, it's been a real privilege just being able to interview
too,
you
Chris.
and
Chris is a good guy.
getting to know
Keep
you.
coming to his website.
Come on, baby. And we love you. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.